Pro Wrestling has arrived. It's been 10 years in the making and it's finally here. You've probably seen this game pop up on Steam or YouTube, and you may wonder why everyone loves it so much. It's rare to see a game so loved, without any catches. Is it some crazy scam? Are all the fans on crack? Or is it that damn good? Stick around and I'll explain everything. I'd imagine most watching have grown up on the SmackDown and the later WWE games, a simple gaming series which involves simple striking, grappling and reversing. The SmackDown series has changed a fair bit over the years, but the basic concept of the game has remained largely the same. Please do not make the mistake of looking at Fire Pro screenshots and thinking it's some Super Nintendo arcade game. All wrestling games past and present cannot hope to compete with what this series can offer you when it comes to pro wrestling simulation. As a long-time fan of the SmackDown series, I seem to get bored of each release quicker as the years go on. I played 2K17 for about a month before shelving it. The modern games look fantastic, but they're terribly dull. I have fond memories of Here Comes the Pain. It was challenging, and the game modes were numerous. Since then, the series has annually declined in fun factor in favour of WWE simulation, which is not necessarily a good thing. Today, we have a great emulation of the WWE product, but not much else. There are only so many cookie-cutter matches that you can have before turning the game off and doing something else. This is where Fire Pro comes in. So how does this little 2D game kick all of the arse? Well, let us begin. Fire Pro is a different beast compared to Western wrestling games. You won't be able to button mash or reverse everything like you're used to. Instead, it relies on quick timing and setting a pace dependent on your chosen wrestler's abilities. With the release of Fire Pro Wrestling World, would you believe me if I said you could download every single wrestler ever and have each one of those downloaded wrestlers behave exactly like they do in real life? Thanks to Fire Pro Wrestling World and the Steam Workshop, this is now a delicious reality. Whenever I try and explain about Fire Pro Wrestling, I ignore the match types, the graphics, the ring editor, and all of that stuff, and I go straight to explaining about the CPU logic. The CPU logic is the most important part of understanding Fire Pro's adoration in the community. When you play any Western wrestling game, very rarely will the AI act different from one match to another. This is especially prevalent in all WWE games past and present. You can watch Rey Mysterio versus The Big Show and they'll battle it out in a very orthodox manner. Rey won't act like the Rey on TV and the simulated match will be very wooden every single time. With Fire Pro, each wrestler has a CPU logic setting which is their personal behaviour pattern. One wrestler will act totally different to another and no two matches will ever be the same. This is an important difference between Western wrestling games and Fire Pro. When you watch Rey Mysterio vs The Big Show in Fire Pro, if the creators have done a good job with their logic settings, the match will play out how it should on TV. People who make wrestlers have complete control over all aspects of the AI. You can choose percentages that are tied to the wrestler's moveset. Wrestlers can be told to execute or not execute certain moves until the time is right. For instance, if you make a big man, climbing the turnbuckle can be disabled. If you're making perhaps Mick Foley, you can make him gain health and stamina when he bleeds because he loves blood. Thanks to the PC platform, there's no limit to how many wrestlers you can include in your game. Due to the 2D graphics, each wrestler is nary a few kilobytes each. I already have 100 plus edits in my game, and at the time of writing, there's over 4,000 wrestlers on the workshop ready to download. And bearing in mind this game only came out on Tuesday the 11th of July, it's now the 16th of July, that amount of content is staggering. Can you imagine what this is going to be like in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years time? There's going to be absolutely everyone. You can also organise your downloaded wrestlers into promotions and groups. For instance, I have a WWE promotion, and within that I have groups for the current roster, New Gen, Attitude Era and the classic WWF era. I'm also working on WCW, ECW, and I plan for many more when more wrestlers get released. The only limit to the amount of downloaded wrestlers is your hard drive space, so you can effectively have every wrestler ever and have them sorted into their relevant promotions. It's almost too good to be true and a dream for any wrestling fan. Thanks to the workshop, you could have every promotion that has ever existed and still have room for your own promotions. You can fill these with silly edits such as the Simpsons characters, SpongeBob SquarePants, or you can make a bloody grizzly bear federation, which is entirely a thing if for anyone that has the game already. Fuck's sake. So you have thousands of wrestlers who behave exactly like their real life counterparts. So what can we do with them in Fire Pro Wrestling world? Well, thanks to the CPU logic, even a singles match can be more entertaining than any other wrestling game can offer at the moment. The goal of Fire Pro has always been to emulate the art of pro wrestling. While other wrestling games have done a decent job of this, Fire Pro does it better. Being a Japanese game, it tries to emulate how a Japanese wrestling match would play out. You start with small attacks such as arm drags, hip tosses and other light moves. The wrestlers will then start to dish out the bigger moves as the match progresses. Towards the end of the match, the tension and the suspense gets ramped up. The last leg of a match is where the magic happens. Finishers and 2.9 kickouts are plenty. The wrestlers in Fire Pro have varying stamina levels and this needs to be taken care of. This can be done with a dedicated breathe button. If you're too aggressive with your offense, your wrestler will get too exhausted to move. You'll have to wait until their stamina regenerates. You must take time to breathe between your offense or you're going to risk being vulnerable. This also goes for the CPU, so you're not alone in managing your breathing. If you enjoy when both wrestlers collapse from exhaustion after a big exchange in real life, then you're going to love Fire Pro. The same situation can happen here. This makes latter parts of matches almost like a strategy game. There are many hidden statistics to the game, like the stamina feature. Another element is spirit, which is kind of like a health stat. As the match goes on, this will get drained as your wrestler gets tired or beaten up. Higher spirit wrestlers will kick out more and will break submissions easier. There are certain situations where spirit can actually be regenerated, such as getting busted open or doing certain moves. Again, think of Mankind going mental after seeing blood, or Hulk Hogan hulking up. There are many more definable situations that can be set to emulate specific wrestler behaviour. Again, these attributes are separately defined for each wrestler. Kurt Angle will be an endurance machine, whereas Bastion Booger will be a lumbering fat ass, much like real life. This is how they say some next level shit. Each wrestler has a designated finishing move that can cause a critical. A critical is basically a wild card knockout. This can be assigned to any move or strike and they can be executed at any time during a match. If you were to F5 someone at the start of the match, they could get knocked out right away. Criticals have a small chance of happening at any one time, and each time you'll be smiling with glee. They're awesome. Having infinite finishers may sound game breaking, but it's not for two reasons. Most of the time finishers will be big attacks, which are done by hitting the circle or B button if you're using an Xbox pad. Big attacks tend to get reversed a lot in the early stages of a match. You must first wear down your opponent before doing these big moves. This isn't always the case though, as each wrestler has varying stats and attributes, so your mileage may vary. I doubt many people can reverse at Brock Lesnar's F5, much like in real life. The second reason is, if you're doing nothing but finishers, it's going to be a boring match. Unless you're specifically going for a squash match, then that's fine, but most Fire Pro players try to have epic back and forth matches for entertainment purposes. If you're abusing the system just to win, it's not really the aim of the game. It's a wrestling simulation, not Street Fighter. Losing a match is just as fun as winning. Like we touched on before, Fire Pro is a timing based game. Wrestlers lock up into a grapple and then moves are done. As a player, you must lock up and then quickly hit your move before the AI or the other human player does. You have to time your attack right or you lose the grapple, so to speak. Thankfully, Fire Pro World has introduced a tutorial mode which teaches you the right time to hit a move, as well as many other match situations that you'll find yourself in. Even to this day I find myself losing matches I really want to win, purely because I've gotten sloppy on my timings. A match can quickly go to shit if your opponent gets the upper hand. If you find the AI too hard or too easy, you can set the CPU level from 1 to 10. Setting 1 will have a larger attack window than setting 10. This is ideal for training outside of the tutorial. When I've not played for a while, I need a couple of matches on setting 1 to get warmed up and used to the timings. When both wrestlers hit their move at the same time, a test of strength battle will begin. You win these by circling your left analog stick. The person who twirled the fastest will win the test and will execute their move. These tend to happen more on the higher difficulty settings. Another much needed inclusion is a dedicated pin button. In the older games, pinfalls were defined in a wrestler's moveset. You'd have to discover what ground move a pin was. One wrestler might have the pin as circle, and another it could be circle up, or circle down, or circle left, or middle attacks. As you can imagine, this is quite annoying. It's great to have a set button for such an important action. Fire Pro Wrestling World lets you compile a giant roster of wrestlers who will act how they should. The intelligent AI will give you incredible lifelike matches, and there's many behind the scenes systems in place to produce amazing wrestling simulations. Just a quick note, many Fire Pro fans do not play their matches, but they simulate them. AI often put on better matches than human players thanks to the CPU logic. So much so, the default setting in Fire Pro World is CPU versus CPU. The developers know that their fans love to watch the AI duke it out. So what are the downsides to this venerable specimen of a game? I could say none, but that would be telling porkies. As it stands now, Fire Pro World is an early access game. Although it's not a horror show like some EA games have been, it's a feature complete game for the most part. The wrestling part of the game hasn't changed for years, because it doesn't need to. The developers only enhance Fire Pro by adding features to it. A new addition in Fire Pro World is the Rapid Strike Exchange. Wrestlers will quickly hit each other multiple times, and one wrestler will either land a clubbing blow, or both wrestlers will collapse to the ground. This is a great addition to the match pacing, as this happens in real life quite a lot. Unlike WWE games, the developers only add new stuff. They don't take away elements of the game and reintroduce them years later as a new feature. At the moment, there are no career or universe modes, but these have been promised by the developers. So you're stuck to playing exhibition matches, either online or offline, or creating tournaments for your own enjoyment. Thankfully, the ability to download wrestlers and the actual wrestling simulation is enough entertainment to justify buying Fire Pro today. The wrestling in Fire Pro is almost perfect, but it does have a couple of flaws. Due to the 2.5D nature of the game, striking can be very awkward. You have a 3D space to move in, but strikes have to be perfectly timed. Watching the CPU trying to use strikes is often a bit spammy and looks silly. You're better off just doing grappling moves. Sadly, I can't really see this being made better due to the 2D nature of the wrestlers. Although you do get used to this janky nature of striking, it's not perfect. If you want a brawling wrestler, you can assign roughneck attacks to your moveset. There are plenty of mounted strikes and dirty moves to choose from, so it's not all bad. One move has your wrestler taking out a fork and jamming it into your opponent's head. Another small flaw is the directional movement for Irish whips and turnbuckle situations. You can only send a wrestler into the left or right turnbuckle if you're on the exact centre plane of the ring. If you're above or below this centre point, you can only Irish whip wrestlers diagonally left or right. Even though this may feel limiting, you can actually drag a standing wrestler around a ring to then position yourself correctly, so again, it's not all bad. Multiple man matches can also be a bit awkward. This is because you instantly grapple when you walk into another wrestler. In big 8-man battle royals, you'll constantly be locking up with all participants. 80% of the time, other wrestlers are near you and you will constantly engage in double team grapples. Group this with the awkward striking system, larger matches are a bit of a cluster. It's by no means unplayable, I just prefer smaller matches. The battle royals are fun to watch though. A small feature I enjoy in Fire Pro games is when a suplex or similar throwing move is done near the ropes. A wrestler will be dumped over the ropes to the outside of the ring. This is very handy for over-the-top battle royals. It also reminds me of the old Royal Rumble games on the old 16-bit platforms. Another slight irritation I have with the game is that selling can be a bit lackluster or sometimes embarrassing. Now bearing in mind, all edits are made by different people, and they may have variable spirit and stamina attributes, but you won't see a lot of selling in the game versus the CPU. Wrestlers get up too quickly, and sometimes the wrestler who has been attacked will get up before the guy who executed the move. It's quirky to say the least. You could say this is realistic if you're fighting against Hulk Hogan. In the game's defence, the simulated speed of the game is twice as fast as real life, so selling times may be exaggerated slightly. Fire Pro does let you sell moves manually, yes you heard me right. When you're on the floor you can hold X or A for Xbox to stay down on the mat. If two human players were coordinating a match, or people online thanks to Steam, you could have some epic selling spots. But sadly for the CPU, there aren't any specific selling attributes other than stamina, spirit, and a funny setting called UKEMI that I will touch on later. I do love a good sell, so I may have to start making friends online who share the same love for my match suspense. One last grievance is that the pick up weapon button is the same as the run button. To pick up weapons you have to stand over them in pixel perfect positions and then you have to press the run button. More often than not you're running around like a doofus trying to pick up a damn weapon. I don't use weapons a lot so it's not a big deal, plus I'm sure the developers will change this in due course. If you come from the Vince Russo school of loving gimmick matches, then the selection isn't very deep here. There are a couple of deathmatch modes in the game to enjoy. One being a landmine deathmatch, where the outside of the ring is filled with mined, barbed wire tables. The other is a barbed wire match, where the ropes are replaced with barbed wire. In my opinion, these matches are only a novelty and it wears off quickly. You can only really Irish whip your opponent to the outside, or suplex them over the ropes for a quick spot fest. The wrestler soon gets back in quick enough, and they'll probably be bleeding. It can be a refreshing change to play these, but I'd rather have the turnbuckles and outside area to play in. A steel cage is also included in the game, and you can actually climb it to dive off of it. FirePro also includes an MMA game mode complete with an octagon. It could be fun to watch D'Lo, Brown and Rikishi fighting in MMA style rounds. The little issues I mentioned are really the only flaws I could think of in the game in my opinion. The good news is, thanks to the game being in constant development, who knows what new features the developers will be adding down the line. At the moment I would call this a sandbox wrestling game. You make your roster and your own entertainment. You can make championship belts and create tournaments. There's no story or promos to be had in these tournaments, so it's a straight up league screen and you watch or play every match to see who the winner is. You can also create your own rings in the game, although the editor at the moment is quite limited. You can only define a few colours to parts of the ring, although this will eventually be replaced with a colour spectrum picker like we have in the Edit Wrestler mode. I'm desperately hoping that the developers will allow for custom logos, especially transparent ping files to be uploaded for ring editing. If custom textured rings can be added to the workshop, this really will be the wrestling game to end all wrestling games. Can you imagine someone making a workshop collection of all wrestlers, promotions, and each promotion having their own custom ring? Goodness gracious me, we're so close to this being a possibility as well. I'm really excited. If you fancy making your own wrestlers, then you're in luck. It's now very easy to make convincing looking wrestlers thanks to the 2D graphics. You simply pick parts that you can layer up to create all sorts of attires. Unlike the last FirePro game, custom edits now support 4 custom attires. This is a creator's dream because you can have simple colour tweaks for each attire, or you can have previous gimmicks for your chosen wrestler. I have a Kane edit whose 4th attire is the Christmas creature. Brilliant. This is so cool to have for wrestlers like HBK, Shawn Michaels, Kurt Angle, the list goes on, and it only adds to the kid in a candy store feel this game provides for wrestling fans. Ever since the graphics on console games have gotten so lifelike, making wrestlers has become a terrible chore. You have to make them so perfect or they look fucking stupid. Here, in FirePro, you simply select parts and layers, and most of the time they'll look spot on. It has made creating wrestlers fun again. Being on PC, editing is now a breeze with mouse support. We have a colour spectrum picker for all parts, and we can also copy and paste colours for each part, which is a godsend. Previously, we would have to define RGB values of 0 to 255 each time. It was a bloody hassle. Once you're happy with how your guy looks, you then move on to creating a moveset, attributes and other abilities such as a wrestling style for your chosen edit. Don't forget to assign logic to your wrestler. When you're done, you can share your creation on the Steam Workshop. Oh, and one small note before I move on. I do believe custom entrance MP3s will be a future addition to this game. I'm not sure if that's going to be okay with the Steam Workshop from a legality standpoint, but it's a tantalising prospect for custom edits. I'm now going to move on to some technical aspects regarding the CPU logic for those interested. I'll start with an interesting post from Makuru RX78 from the GameFAQs forum. He's posted a nice breakdown of the mysterious aspects of the edit mode. Each wrestler has a few different hidden values in general that go up and down throughout the match. The obvious one is the condition of individual areas of the body, the neck, head, back body and limbs. Most strikes and throws will target the back. Sleeper type submissions and moves such as the DDT, the cutter, and certain variations on power bombs such as brainbusters, belly to back suplexes will target the head, and certain wear down grapples and joint submissions will target the corresponding limb with varying degrees of damage. An elbow to the arm will do mild damage to the arm, while something like Inoki's choke sleeper will lower their neck health drastically. Then there's stamina, aka breathing. The lower stamina goes, the slower the wrestler moves, and the more clearly exhausted their stationary sprite becomes. This is affected in skill edit by their breathing stat. Simply fighting their opponent causes a wrestler's stamina to go down, but besides that, most submission holds and pinfalls will exhaust a wrestler's stamina slightly, though with a trade-off. Both health and stamina can be restored by taking a breath. Setting the CPU logic to do nothing while a wrestler is down or dazed will cause them to keep their distance and to start to catch their breath. Their recovery skill rating changes the effectiveness of this tactic. The last major hidden meter is spirit. This is also affected by a skill rating in the edit wrestler menu. It affects the chances that a wrestler will get a second wind later in the match, to break out of a submission hold or to kick out, even when their health is at critical levels. The previously mentioned stamina trade-off plays a role here. The more often a wrestler is pinned or put in a submission hold, especially wear-down submissions, the more their spirit rating rises, and the more likely they are able to come from behind in a match. However, certain moves will actually lower the stat. Heel tactics such as low blows will both do regular damage and spirit damage, or will primarily drop the wrestler's fighting spirit down massively. Certain skills will affect all of these stats. For example, hard body will add a spirit buff to pinfalls when the opponent hits the wrestler with something other than a major move, finisher or signature move, and guts in general makes it harder to pin them at low health. As for the CPU logic settings for personality, there are 4 big ones: UKEMI, aka selling, personal traits, discretion and flexibility. UKEMI: the higher it is, the more likely a wrestler will sell for a mid-match or late-match move, even when they're not weakened. What isn't obvious is the effect of selling / taking a bump. It fills up a sort of hidden super meter, which boosts damage inflicted and restores part of the wrestler's health based on the bumps they took. Using the WWF as a basis, for guys like Hulk Hogan or John Cena, you may want to set their UKEMI in a way where it's lower at the start and higher in the middle of the match, and then extremely low late into the match to resemble the typical rhythm of a main event match. The dominant face, the heel makes a comeback through chicanery, the face powers up and comes in from behind to get the win. Just a little break here, I've got another write-up from someone else. This is Bill Wood from his fantastic Wrestler Editor Creation Guide. This is his little write-up on UKEMI. Using UKEMI basically means disabling your character's ability to counter his opponent's moves during a match. Note that UKEMI does not disable your character's ability to win a grapple in any way, only his ability to auto-counter in the instance that the opponent wins the grapple. A perfect example of this would be the opponent going for a strong grapple too early in the match, which almost always results in an auto-counter. If UKEMI is used, the auto-counter does not happen. At first glance, using UKEMI seems like a nonsensical thing to do. After all, why would you want to intentionally inhibit your wrestler? The reason is that there is an actual, very distinct benefit to using UKEMI, because while your wrestler does take health damage from being on the receiving end of his opponent's moves, he may also receive a healthy boost of spirit once his spirit meter is depleted. So in effect, using UKEMI wisely could produce a sort of hulking up effect where your wrestler takes a certain amount of punishment and then receives a huge spirit boost late in a match in order to make his big comeback. So you can see, UKEMI is a rather in-depth feature that adds a lot of variance to the CPU logic. Now, continuing on with Makeru RX78's write-up on some more logic settings. What's less obvious is personal traits. There was conjecture about what this meant, but according to long-time FirePro fan Jason Blackheart, this affects the wrestler's tendency to go for big moves from the corner and ring dives, entertaining moves that have high risks. The higher the personal trait stat, the more they go for Irish whips to the corner or outside of the ring, where they risk having highly damaging moves reversed, or for the move to miss. The lower it is, the more sensible their style becomes. Discretion affects the wrestler's tendency to keep going for the kill, rather than taking a moment to rest. It might also affect their tendency to drag wrestlers away from the ropes near the end of a match. The higher the discretion, the more likely later in the match they will back away from a downed opponent and to take a moment to catch their breath. The lower it is, the more ferocious they are, and thus the more likely they are to blow themselves up mid-match. Again, using WWF logic, a guy like the Ultimate Warrior would probably have low discretion, given that he would be portrayed as a guy whose offense is relentless but short-lived. Flexibility determines a wrestler's adaptation to facing a different style. Basically, how well a wrestler adapts to an MMA match and vice versa. The higher the flexibility, the more likely they are going to switch up their tactics in a fight with a guy whose fighting and or return style is set to shooter, fighter or grappler styles that normally ignore Irish whips altogether. Or, for a shoot fighter, how likely they are to switch from a style oriented around using the front facelock to control opponents' positions using an Irish whip to throw them to the ground. For guys with an actual background in MMA and worked shoot fights, current wrestlers include Minoru Suzuki, Shinsuke Nakamura, Alberto Del Rio and even Jushin Liger. You want to adjust the flexibility accordingly. Thanks to Maikaru RX78 for the great write-up once again. This was a great breakdown of the important CPU logic settings. There are a couple more settings which are less important but still interesting nonetheless. One is called touch work, which defines how long the CPU will stay in a ring during a tag match. The other is cooperation, which again ties in for tag matches. And the third is entertainment. I only have a very English explanation for it here. It means if the entertainment setting is set to high, a wrestler will be clumsy. For example, when your wrestler does a hammer throw, he will make the opponent fall outside of the ring or corner post many times. When it is low, he is reliable. Another source contradicts this, so I'm not entirely sure what this governs. Also, it's probably worth mentioning that Fire Pro Returns did actually suffer a mistranslation. These important stats were reversed, so what I've just read out I think is going to be technically wrong for Fire Pro World, unless it's still reversed. So a low setting actually means high and a high setting means low. I'm not sure if this is confirmed, but I just thought I'd mention it in case it doesn't make sense, does it? Why would a low setting make them more? Why would a high setting make it less? So it was just a mistranslation with Fire Pro Returns, and hopefully it's been fixed in World. So yeah. Hopefully this breakdown gets across just how many things are at play here in the Fire Pro series. It's like all of the wrestlers are lotto cards. No two variations will ever be the same. I'm now going to take an actual look at the logic screen for you, just so you can see what it looks like. It's an unscripted segment, so excuse any excess stumbling. I will quickly run through the match situations so you can see how the logic editor looks. So now that we have a basic understanding of how CPU logic works, we're just going to have a quick look at my creator wrestler, Hardcore Holly, no less. We're going to dive straight into his logic just to have a sort of look at how it all comes together really. So here you can see we've got stand back, which is when Hardcore Holly, when he's being controlled by the AI, what he does when he stands still. Now this little spreadsheet might look a little bit intimidating, but it's fairly simple. You can see at the top it says small damage and large damage. Small damage is when the wrestler has sustained little damage, so it's going to be at the start of the match, or if he's in a squash match and he's doing really well. Large damage will be for near the end of the match and when the match is about to end. As you know from real wrestling matches, the beginning and the end of the match are largely different. So this first stat here, it says initiate grapple. In both instances, Hardcore Holly will lock up into a grapple more than 0.5% of the time. So 66%, for the most part, he's going to go for a grapple. And now I like to think Hardcore Holly's a bit of a bruiser. He doesn't fuck around. So I've set his stand back setting quite low. Some wrestlers, this setting can be higher. They'll tend to stand around. They'll circle you to try and avoid attacks, to try and get their breath back. Well, Hardcore Holly's going to go straight in and he's going to be coming for you. Again, this is different for every wrestler, so tailor it to your liking. And these last little things are the strikes that Hardcore Holly will do. So you can see here he's going to favour grappling compared to doing those standing awkward strikes. So he's not going to be swinging wildly doing random strikes. He's going to heavily favour doing grapples. So again, fairly easy stuff. The next instance we have initiate grapple. And here we can control every part of the match and what moves your wrestler's going to do. So again, it's all percentage based. You have your small grapples, which are the quick ones. The medium grapples, which are the sort of mid-match, the quite offensive moves. And then, when we head on over to large damage, again, when the match is in the sort of last leg, we're going to be seeing the big moves. So Hardcore Holly's finisher, the Alabama Slam, aka the Pendulum Bomb, when he's sustained large damage, there's a 10% chance Hardcore Holly's going to hit his finisher. Again, sounding like a broken record, this can be different to any wrestler. You could make a desperate wrestler, let's say The Undertaker. You could set his finisher to be 90%. So when he's badly damaged, he's always going to go for his finisher. Think Seth Rollins, someone a bit snidey. That's sort of how all of this works. And this is exactly the same for every part of the match. And every match instance. Here we've got circle the opponent. So when Hardcore Holly circles the opponent, is he going to go for a back grapple? Is he going to do this? Is he going to do that? What he's going to do when he does an Irish whip? Is he going to clothesline you? Is he going to stand there? Is he going to counter you? Is he going to try and dodge you? And you can see down the left hand side there, these are all different instances for when what the opponent is doing. What is the AI going to do? So we're just going to go through down on the left here. The guard position and the mount position, that is for the MMA game. Again, that's all its own little thing. And here's the fabled UKEMI setting, which we've discussed just a minute ago. Again, for small damage, medium and large damage, you can choose whether or not your wrestler's going to counter in certain situations. Again, go back over the UKEMI thing we did a couple of minutes ago. A very, very interesting setting, that's for damn sure. Opponent at back, so what's going to go on there? Opponent outside of the ring. This is interesting. So if Hardcore Holly's fighting someone and they've gone out of the ring, I've actually set it so Hardcore Holly will most of the time try and go out of the ring. But also what he'll do, he'll run against the ropes and come back as if he's going to jump over the ropes. But because Hardcore Holly's a bit sort of boring, he'll do a feint jump move where he sort of pretends to jump over the rope to sort of put the fear of God into the other wrestler outside on the ring. So again, that's a personal touch just for Hardcore Holly. So it really goes to show how sort of in depth and how characteristic you can make your wrestlers. Here we have performance, which is pretty much taunting. So you can see here, most of the time Hardcore Holly's not going to taunt at the best of times. If the opponent's dazed, if the opponent's down, if they're outside the ring. So if the opponent goes outside of the ring, you could have a very cocky wrestler, like a heel, or if they're boring like Hardcore Holly, he's just going to stand there and wait for you to bloody get back in so he can kick your ass. Now, probably the most important setting of the AI logic are priority moves. Now, it's important when you look for edits on the workshop that they have logic assigned. In the description of most of the workshop downloads, they'll just have "this is a custom wrestler," which is fucking annoying. You really want people to put in their descriptions that they've included movesets and logic. And the reason for this is, if the wrestlers have the default logic, bearing in mind we've spoken about everything regarding logic, UKEMI and all that stuff, probably the most important thing is the priority attacks. If you were to download an Undertaker wrestler who looks great, has all of the attires, but he has standard logic, if the creator has set the finisher for that Undertaker as Tombstone, but they have not made that a priority attack, when he goes for a Tombstone, he won't go for a pin. Here you can see I've got the Pendulum Bomb, aka the Alabama Slam, as a priority attack. So 95% of the time, when the Pendulum Bomb is executed, Hardcore Holly will go for a pin. 95% is practically all the time, so you can sort of see where this is going. A vertical falcon arrow, which I've assigned as a signature move. Again, you can see 40 to 30% of the time he'll go for a pin. The developers have promised that there's going to be more of these, so the behaviour of your wrestlers will be even more sort of advanced. Could you imagine the things you can come up with these, like Cesaro's swing, John Cena's 5-knuckle shuffle, for example? So this is quite an important segment that, again, when you're looking for wrestlers on the workshop, make sure that they have custom logic, because you don't want to be having Cena do an F5 on you and then he picks you up and does an armbar or something. So yeah, very important part of edit mode. And here we have the showmanship stat, which I believe is the entertainment stat, which I touched on before. We've got the discretion there, the flexibility, cooperation, all of the things that I've mentioned previous. So go back just a bit in the video to sort of hear the details on them. Outside return count, when the wrestler will come back in when the count's getting quite high. Do they want to get counted out? Do they want to be well behaved? So yeah, and touch work is when it's a tag match. Is the wrestler going to hog the limelight? Is he going to tag the opponent back in? Tag your partner back in, sorry. And weapons, the chance of weapons being used, which again I've set quite low just because. And yeah, that is the bulk of the edit mode logic. It looks a bit complicated, but really, when you know what the things are, they make all the sense in the world, really. You have to define, you have to think about what the wrestler does on TV at the start of the match, in the middle of the match, and when the good stuff happens at the end of the match. You can absolutely control what every single wrestler does. So, like I've said, it's a fascinating, amazing system that WWE games can't ever hope to even compete with. So yeah, that is the logic mode. That's about it for Fire Pro Wrestling World. It offers you near wrestling perfection, and there's still more to come from the developers. For 15 quid there are many worse games to get. This is what I would call a seminal game. One like Half-Life, Armour, Mountain Blade, Warband, games that just keep giving with their content. This isn't some yearly release like the WWE games. This is the best wrestling simulator you will ever have. This game will please every demographic of wrestling fan. If you grew up playing WrestleFest in the arcade, you can get all of the late 80s WWF wrestlers. If you love NXT, you can grab all of the NXT wrestlers past and present. If you're a mid-card fan like me, then there are plenty to choose from. Val Venus, D'Lo Brown. The depth of Fire Pro is staggering and the fun is limitless. Other than the small issues I covered, this is 100% buy for any wrestling fan. Once you get used to the attack timings, you'll be a lifelong fan, I guarantee it. One final note, please make sure the wrestlers you download have moveset and logic assigned to them. You can see from this video how important they are from enjoyment purposes. Also, there was a glitch on release day which caused logic and alternate attires to not be uploaded for custom downloaded wrestlers. This was fixed on July 14th. So make sure the wrestlers you're looking at have been updated on or after July 14th. You can see next to the thumbnail, next to the picture, there should be a little changelog note. What are you waiting for then? Get the game, get it downloading, and of course, thank you for watching today and welcome to the Fire Pro series.